should know that I will be doing the intro elsewhere. There's nothing worse than sitting on a podcast listening to an intro, but I thought that was absolutely a wonderful way to begin. Gee was just telling me offset that you can't trust a marketer that doesn't swear. I
Definitely
think
not.
that's
They cannot be trusted. You
pretty
can't give
much
them don't give them anything sharp.
right.
No.
Absolutely, positively. I also think you and I are cut from the same cloth on disliking SWOT analyses for the base nature of their oversimplistic solution set.
Yeah. If we want to do Janet and John, then we'll read the appropriate books, right? But if we want to do something that actually moves a needle, then come on. What are we going to do next? Blue Ocean Strategy, for God's sake. Good grief.
Oh, the worst book ever. And it's amazing how many people tucked it under their arm. All right, G, let me start with this as a fellow marketer. Why don't, and I especially chose this question for you because you teach and you are part of helping to save young minds from the narrow, it's all about price and innovation and feature and benefit mentality. Why don't business leaders get marketing? They say they want growth and then actively work against their own success. Now, I ask everybody that's a marketer this question because I imagine that in your agency, like in ours, I spend the predominant amount of my time educating people on the missing Harvard chapter called People Actually Need to Want to Buy Your Product. So can you give me an understanding, if you can, about why business leaders, from your perspective, don't get the value of this?
I think there's a number of facets to the question, Bill. Like there is, anything to do with marketing, the answer is it depends, right? That's where it starts with. Firstly, we're hiring the wrong type of people to fulfill marketing roles. And that is because we don't know what marketing is.
Very good. Let's expand on that because that's an interesting point of view.
We think marketing is promotion or comms, maybe, okay? We don't think about all of the other strategic areas that marketing touches within the business. Because when we were a lowly person further down the corporate ladder and we saw from a third party point of view what marketing was doing for output, that's all they saw. They saw tote bags and stress balls and brochures and trade show booths and all that other detritus, right? So we think that's the person that we want to do, in inverted commas, marketing. So number one, we're employing the wrong people to fulfill the role of marketing. We're not employing people who are trained, educated, or experienced in marketing with an uppercase M. So that's from one perspective. From the other perspective, the people who are taking the roles, sweeping generalization here, Bill, okay? I'm not saying everyone. There are plenty of people who've had the term marketing in their job title who are absolutely awesome people. Unfortunately, we are in the minority. And I have a feeling that it's getting worse, not better. Anyway, what I'm saying is that the people who are taking these marketing roles haven't got a frigging clue what marketing is either. They think it is tote bags and stress balls and brochures and trade show booths. And I also think that if we abstract it just one further layer, I think if we look at the C-suite, especially CFOs, but CEOs and CFOs, I think that these people, sounds very xenophobic here, but I don't mean it to. These people.
I was going to say, I saw the hand generally sweep in a direction.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, my hand was not aloft. The CEOs and CFOs, generally speaking, CEOs and CFOs, well, especially CFOs who've come from a finance background, an economics background, or an engineering background, or something very logical, right? Very matter of fact. Okay. I think they have an inherent distrust in marketing because it goes against this sequential rational thought process that accountants and economists love so much, right? If you look at business in general, okay, much of business is founded under let's call it an engineering model, okay? 2 + 2 is 4. And it always will be, right? You could even argue that economics is based on an engineering model because it looks at economies as markets as though they operate under, the rules of physics. Newtonian physics, not quantum physics. Quantum physics are actually very interesting. Yeah. Quantum physics is actually much more like marketing, actually, because
very much so.
1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. 1 + 1 can sometimes equal horse, right?
Right.
which is great. So what I'm trying to say is business is overwhelmingly driven by this conditional, rational, logic-based thinking. What we're trying to do in business is, supposing you're making widgets in your business, okay? What you're trying to do within that model, systems thinking, right? If you can reduce the cost of making that widget, right? You buy cheaper raw
By
materials, right? Or you invest in a faster widget making machine, whatever efficiency variables that you can do. This is looked at as a good thing, right? Trying to find ways to reduce costs or effort, to increase productivity, to increase efficiency, all of that sort of stuff. But what we're trying to do now is we're trying to extrapolate that kind of thinking into marketing. And what we're trying to do now is trying to reduce the effort and cost, in inverted commas, of marketing output by mechanizing the process.
It's a wildly dangerous proposition.
Absolutely.
Did you happen to watch the Adobe Summit this year?
No, I didn't.
The Adobe team proudly marches out on stage with all the fervor of the iPhone rollout with Steve Jobs' famous presentation, and they say, "Watch this." And they used Coca-Cola as an example. And they said, here we have data set 1 is made of all pre-approved brand assets, logos, colors, fonts. Here we have data set 2. This is all pre-approved product imagery. And number 3, we have pre-approved prompt sets. And then he holds his finger aloft. Watch this. And deposes a button, and a flurry of activity occurs behind the scene, and suddenly 500 or so horrendously mediocre digital assets are suddenly created, which they proudly click through. The headlines aren't properly established. They don't make any sense to the product set, but you have 500 assets in 16 sizes.
Right.
And they stand there amidst the applause. The crowd goes crazy, and they say, "We're putting an end to the drudgery of marketing." Everybody, and the crowd goes crazy.
Right.
And you look at it, and all people like me are doing, sitting in the back row watching, is going, we're going to eat these companies alive.
Yeah.
Because when they reduce themselves to the lowest possible common denominator, the people who think and have an interesting perspective and a unique point of view and differentiate themselves from what AI has told them is the best answer that worked overall for the greatest number of people, and therefore you should follow it, are the ones that are going to stand heads and shoulders above everybody else. I have been blown away by the adoption mindset of AI is going to make all this easy.
Because you can make it predictable. Predictably bad, but predictable. We had a version of this way before AI, okay? Marketing automation, MarTech, it's been around for like 20 years, 25 years, okay? So the idea of slapping together some communication based upon a template or royalty-free images and then vomiting out 50 different versions of communications creative and then measuring the one that generates the most return. And, if you can't hit the target, hit what you can and call that the target, right? That's what we're doing. It's efficient because it's not wasting resources. But the question we have to ask is it effective? How many people...
the answer is overwhelmingly
Of course. No. How many people are we pissing off in the process before we get to find that 0.0001% uplift over all of the rest of the crap that we've been vomiting out all this time?
What I don't understand is the misunderstanding of A/B testing is such a profound phenomenon that you could write books about it. A/B testing was never supposed to replace intent or research. A/B testing was supposed to be in how to execute well. Nobody, when Eddie Murphy decided to become the funniest man alive, he did not ask people whether he should be a chef or a comedian or a bellhop. He said, I'm going to become this thing. That's intent. The A/B testing isn't in what should we be. The A/B testing is, I told the joke this way on Monday night and got this much of a laugh, and I told the joke this way on Tuesday night and got that much of a laugh, and therefore, in my journey to become the thing that I have intentionally decided to arrive at as my destination, this series of A/B testing allows me to guarantee the efficiency of arriving there as quickly as humanly possible.
It is so to prove...
the notion that people are removing thinking and intention from this.
Because they want to make it like engineering, Bill. They want to make it like physics, okay? Most of these people couldn't spell A/B testing, let alone do it, okay? What we're doing is proving or disproving a hypothesis. It's a scientific method, but you need to have two valid arguments in the first place. This is another reason why I get very upset about things like data-driven marketing. People who jump up and down about data-driven marketing. What we're trying to do is mechanize and to industrialize a process which is very contextual, very emotionally driven, and is certainly irrational and illogical at its heart, because the targets of our efforts are not robots, do not always react in the same way each time. We're dealing with human beings, and human beings as entities, anything but rational. So we can't apply
Where do you
rational
begin?
processes to that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, not at all. I think that's very well put. I don't know when and where the storytelling aspect fell off the way that it did. I think, the operation and finance backgrounds that you refer to earlier are certainly to receive their fair share of the blame, right? If what I'm looking for is, it says on the invoice sheet that I bought 2 widgets, where are my widgets? And if I buy 2 widgets, I should be able to make 4 widgets from the 2, and thus from 4 to 8, and so on and so on. Then yes, of course, the mentality is there. We did a study a few years ago on behalf of our agency to find out what had happened to the CMO role. This was about 6 years ago. And what I was really surprised to find was that people were no longer hiring CMOs to protect the brand. They were hiring CMOs very much in a lowercase c capacity to come in and fix particular problems. So the CMO's role was now, and what got me off on this tangent in the first place was watching. I had read a number of articles that had all been released within a series of weeks of each other that was talking about the further reducing lifespan of the typical CMO. And what I was trying to figure out is, was the lifespan of the CMO actually being reduced, or was it because they couldn't do the job of building the brand, or was it something else? That was the premise at the time, was that CMO's life expectancy was dropping because they couldn't affect change. And the further premise beyond that, if you tip the first domino, the second domino to fall was that must be because they couldn't achieve something in a short enough time frame to be able to prove to the people who hired them the brand advice they were giving would ultimately lead to sales. What I found instead was that the CMO's role was no longer about building brand whatsoever. Now what they are hired guns with a history of fixing particular problems. We don't have an organic social media thing. Put it in place. And when that thing is done, they are released from their tenure, whatever that is, 12 months, 15 months, 18 months. And so artificially, the perception is that CMOs can't hold their jobs any longer, with the wild presumption being that it's because they couldn't be effective in doing their job, when in reality, they're being hired to do something that only has a 6-month to 15-month lifespan in the first place. So they're now looked at totally differently. Again, I see this as a massive opportunity for any brand that's willing to say something different. And I love when people say that brand is dead, and then look at the success of Liquid Death, and I'm like, all they do is storytelling, and they just hit a $1.4 billion valuation for selling flavored water in a can. Brand won't ever die because people communicate the same way. As long as we are brought up sharing and developing our values around the construct of story, this is the way that we will be communicating and relating and determining the value of, as long as we're alive.
We've been doing this for millennia.
Somebody comes along and truly sticks a matrix stick up the back of our head and says,
we've been doing it for millennia, Bill. We've been doing it for millennia. And it's Bill Bernbach and the Unchanging Man. It's exactly that. We've been doing things in a certain way a very long length of time. Many people who call themselves marketers. Notice I didn't call them marketers. I call them people who call themselves marketers, because I think there needs to be a distinction there.
And there should be.
Right. What they tend to ignore is that the fundamental emotional levers that trigger buying decisions haven't changed. They haven't changed in the last 5 years, 15 years, 50 years, 500 years. The tactics have changed. Of course they have. Tactics change every 5 minutes. That's not what we're talking about. But if we're talking about trying to be effective, to actually move the sales needle, that's why we're doing all of this crap, right? We're not running a charity here. We're doing this to make money. If marketing doesn't sell, it's not marketing. It's fluff. It's noise. And we've got enough noise. Yeah. We need more signal. The problem as I see it, is firstly, we're hiring wrong people. Secondly, I was very interested to learn about the survey that you did 6 years ago, because the first question that I would ask is, saying a CMO is not really a CMO anymore. It's a particular job to be done that they're coming in to implement, after which time it's see you later, off they go. Who or whom within the company is making that decision? Because it's certainly not anybody with a marketing background. And that is a problem, because all we're doing is being reactionary because of the last TikTok video we saw. No disrespect to TikTok, of course.
None at all.
None at all.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. The shiny object syndrome that drives decision making is rampant. And in my experience, is typically led by CEO or CSO.
Yeah.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Chief sales officer or chief executive officer has seen something and reacts to it, then results in their chasing some object for as long as either one of them can stand to pay attention to it, which is only in itself funny because typically both of those people are visionary in nature and have the attention span of a newt. So when you think about the likelihood that they will be re-excited by another shiny object 15 minutes after they saw the first one, and thus again 15 minutes later, at some point, the investment groups behind it, the people working for the organization, the leadership team that is watching these people make these decisions should be stepping forward to say something. But of course, now we're getting into job security and protection and such.
And politics. Politics is a very powerful force, as we all know. It is actively preventing business growth in so many otherwise, I would call them innovative organizations. I'm sure you do as well. I speak to business owners, CMOs, CEOs, CFOs pretty much on a daily basis. And the underlying problem is very rarely a marketing problem. It's a business problem, but is being tarred with the marketing brush. All we need is ... And it's like as if what you're addressing is a symptom, not the actual deep-rooted cancer that needs to be cut out. And it's usually something very, very fundamental from a cultural perspective, from an institutionalized perspective within the organization that needs to change. But trying to say that, especially to what I call a founder CEO, somebody who actually founded the company is now running the company, it's very difficult to even broach that subject with the individual, because it's like telling them their baby is ugly. But the thing is, what got you here won't get you there. It's a Stephen Covey thing. We need to be able to embrace that whole change management thing, and marketing is a key cornerstone within that strategy moving forward. We're still looked at upon this as nice to have. Heated seats or power steering, or, oh yeah, it would be good if we had that. No. Is it key to your business to have electricity coming into your building? Is it key to have a roof on your building? Because you can't do anything else unless you have these basic pieces in place. Because of the way marketing works and is seen within the business, it's looked down upon, it's frowned upon. And I have to say that marketers themselves can't be absolved of responsibility from that, because we do play the game. We bark when the bell rings, right? So part of this is our fault. We don't talk to the C-suite the way the C-suite need to be talked to. We don't speak bored. What Marketing 101 is, articulate your value proposition in words that make sense to your target audience. We don't do that. We start talking about salience and share of voice and all of this touchy-feely woo-woo, sit on a mountain retreat wearing a tie-dye smock and under a pyramid and believe in the power of the crystal. We're doing all of this stuff.
Right.
So it's no wonder we're looked upon with derision by the C-suite. We don't talk the language of the boardroom, which is the language of finance. We don't do that.
Well, it's difficult, I found, for most people to talk the language of finance when there is no way to objectify the result. And I find it funny that people will lean to ROAS, as you described earlier, the 0.0001% click-through, 50% of which was an accident because the X on the get rid of it off my screen button is so small. And they'll say, we have a 0.001% increase, and that's twice the national average. And they'll nod knowingly, sagely. I say, simple math. Now, I'm no Harvard economics, graduate, but simple math, if I can get a 1 to 3% return any day of the week on direct mail, and the best you can do with your digital advertising is 0.0001% return, doesn't that mean that I get 1,000 to a 10,000% better return by sending direct mail? And nobody wants to hear that.
No,
and the
because
other
it's not
thing that I
sexy,
find
Bill.
fascinating,
It's not sexy.
there's
There's no flashing lights.
There's nothing sexy about 0.00 anything either. For whatever reason, though, they hang on to it. I refer to it as the opioid epidemic of marketing, is the dependency on ROAS, because it's like, if you want to get a client hooked, throw PPC at them. It's like the cheap crack that gets them addicted so that they're quickly on the road to heroin. Let me give you this little thing that dopamine hits you so that I can get you onto the next addiction. It's, you can sit down and talk about ROAS all day long and they'll buy it. And you sit down and talk about ROI and they say, well, how do you measure it? Well, we'll put something in market and you will get increased visits to the website. You'll get increased inbound. You'll get increased this and that. But that's not trackable. I'll say, okay.
Attribution is an issue. Attribution has always been an issue. And so this is why we end up measuring stuff that doesn't really need to be measured, but we measure it because it's easy. Rather than...
Gee, you said something earlier that I think people should hear more on, and that is the danger of being data-driven.
Oh.
I would love to hear your thoughts on why data-driven is such a danger. I have my own opinions on this. I'd be super curious to hear yours.
Number one, I think anybody who goes around boasting that they do data-driven marketing clearly hasn't got a clue what they're doing and probably conning their employer out of a salary check every week, because what they're actually doing is absolving themselves of the responsibilities of a marketer. Sorry to sit on the fence like that, but what am I going to tell you?
Sure.
We say data-driven marketing because it makes us sound like we're scientists. It makes us sound like we're adults. It's to convince others, and probably ourselves, actually, that we're running some sophisticated operation rather than waving a wet finger in the air. The thing is, if you speak to real, actual, living, breathing scientists, none of them would ever call themselves data-driven because they know that data should be the last thing that should drive anything. Because data isn't truth. Data is evidence. Data is what we need to ingest in order that we can make decisions. The data is there to help us determine which part of our belief structures align with reality and which parts are made up bullshit that we've just heard from somebody we watched on LinkedIn or something, right?
Sure.
We want to think that we're adopting some kind of scientific process, the so-called scientific method. But if we want to do that, then the first thing we need to do is come up, as they do in real science, grown-up science, is you have to come up with a theory. You observe something interesting, develop an explanation for why that thing happened, and then you design experiments to prove yourself right or wrong. And then the data from those experiments either supports the theory or forces you to revisit it and think again. And through a process of constant refinement and iteration is how we've pretty much figured out everything from, antibiotics to space travel. Now, marketing could work this way, but it doesn't. Instead, we do it the wrong way round. We launch campaigns, measure whatever we think is important, not what is actually important, because, like I said, some of these things are hard to measure. Some of these things are impossible to measure. And then we adjust the parameters of the campaign based upon what the numbers appear to tell us. The thing is, that way, if we do it that way round, if the campaign doesn't work, then our boss doesn't fire us since we did what the data told us to do, right?
I find the biggest challenge with it is that they aren't asking the right question. It is remarkable to me that the people who run data are typically blissfully unaware of the number one rule of data, which is garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
If you're asking the wrong questions in the first place, you're not getting to what motivated somebody behind the scenes. You're simply asking them, what do you like? What don't you like? What would make it better? What wouldn't make it better? These things will not lead you to the insights necessary to create a unique point of view.
And also, while we're on the subject of surveys and customer feedback, customers lie. Customers don't tell the truth.
They do. No, gee, that's not possible. No, absolutely.
The thing
not.
is, management.
Nor are there any strong opinions in the research process that could sway anybody else that was participating. These things never happen.
Like we said earlier on, okay, management are more likely to believe hard, tangible, mathematical, rigor-based numbers than contextual influences, feelings, emotions, or irrationality. The issue is what we're optimizing for metrics that don't matter. We spend weeks improving click-through rates. Customer lifetime value continues to fall off a cliff, right? We're just looking at the wrong stuff. And then we pretend everything that's important can be measured. For example, we know that brand affinity influences purchase decisions, but good luck tracking that in Google Analytics, right? Ain't going to happen. Okay. There are 101 other spheres of influence that will affect a buyer positively or negatively before getting to the point where it's formed that mental structure in their brain so that when they are in market, when they are looking to buy and they're in the supermarket aisle and they're looking at our particular brand of canned water, they look at ours rather than looking at somebody else's, which is all marketing can ever do. At the end of the day, it's like SEO for your brain. All we can do is plant that seed of recollection so that when a customer is ready to buy, they think of us, as well as probably a handful of others, the category leader and, a few others, but just so that we are in that consideration set. That's all we can ever do. So all the rest of it is smoke and mirrors. It's all just trying to get us to that point. If we're trying to distill the whole thing down to its essence, that's what we're trying to do, right? Thirdly, I think the other thing is that we're confusing correlation with causation. Campaign performance improves after we change the headline, so obviously the headline caused the improvement. Never mind that the competition launched a new product or, the weather's changed or our target audience just got paid. Right? But we see a pattern and we assume that we understand the pattern and we know the reason why that pattern occurred. The result is we're doing all of this stuff for the wrong reason. Marketing has learnt that framing decisions as being data-driven provides us with, we said it earlier on, it's political cover.
It's bubble wrap.
It's bubble wrap. If campaigns fail, we can blame the measurement system. But if they succeed, we can take credit. Right? Either way, we avoid taking creative risks that may produce breakthrough results, but we'll never ever know. Okay.
Gee, is it possible for a business to win without risk?
I think if you want to avoid risk in business, you wouldn't start a business, would you? You'd go off and work in a bank or something, or,
one would think, and yet I see businesses do this every day. It's so funny. The switch to protecting what you have from going after what you want is very subtle, but it's very quick. The shift from what if to what is kind of the way that I think about it. But it's like when you start a business, you have no what is. It's all what if. And so you go out and you're thinking to yourself, I can do this, or I can provide that, or I can secure these kinds of clients, whatever. And then the next thing you know, you've got some little bit of momentum. And somewhere the doubt starts coming in. We better not do that, because if we do, we might. And we better not do that, because that could. And the next thing you know, the company is all about what is and not at all about what if. And I think that's one of the most dangerous hidden transitions that happens, and it happens very quietly, is protecting what you have instead of hungering for what you could have.
We get complacent and we become risk averse. But the thing is, as you've just pointed out, risk aversion isn't what got here in the first place. Okay? We got here not by avoiding risk. And if you look at some of the most successful businesses out there, they're constantly taking a chance. Look at Amazon. Look at the number of failures. Everybody remember the Fire Phone? I mean, Fire Sale, let alone a Fire Phone. There's a hundred things that, Jeff Bezos tried, crashed and burned, got up, dusted himself down and moved on, right? Okay, Amazon is just one example, but there are plenty of businesses who are continually either reinventing themselves, reinventing their product, sometimes actually coming up with competitors to their existing product line, cannibalizing their own product before somebody else does the same thing. Apple is a great example of that. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. If you're wary of risk, can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. That's what they say, right?
Gee, thinking of the emerging brand, the group that's trying to hit 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, what piece of advice or a few pieces of advice can we leave them with today as we bring this to a close to help keep them on the straight and narrow?
I think there's 4 words. Listen to your customers. I remember reading something, it was earlier this year, I think it was HBR, but it could have been something else. The average CMO or marketing manager hadn't spoken to a customer in the previous 6 weeks. I just think they're scandalous. How on earth can you know what you have to do if you're not speaking to the biggest advocates and prime examples of the people who are looking to buy what you're selling? Now, as we said before, we have to meter this. It has to be taken in context, and you can't rely on a single point of truth, because there isn't, because customers lie. Customers tell you what they want, what you want to hear. So they will say that I bought it because of this, total and utter nonsense. And they will also post-rationalize their reasons to make them sound less stupid than they are when they were considering buying stuff. Oh, what I did, I weighed up the pros and cons and I made a little matrix about you and then no, you didn't. You liked the smell of the salesperson, so you bought. Nobody does matrices and of everybody. I mean, especially in B2B, you go into B2B and you go into a particularly dominated market. You're telling me that everybody makes a matrix of like the 262 CRMs that are around and sort of makes little Nobody does that crap. Nobody does that. What you do is you say, okay, what are the 5 biggest CRMs that I can come to mind right now? Maybe you'll ask your network, who will probably reinforce you with the same names. Maybe once in a blue moon you'll get an outlier. Somebody will say, well, I've never used them, but I hear good things about X. So possibly that might make the list. But otherwise, everybody else, they're spinning plates. So you need to temper the reaction that you get from customers, because they will post-rationalize with lies to make them sound more intelligent, okay? You know, the prefrontal cortex is a bullshit artist. It tells you things which are totally untrue after the fact, but they make it sound plausible. If there's one thing we can do more of, impact what we're doing at the coalface, at the sales end, is to understand a little bit more about why our buyers buy what we sell, and what the emotional drivers are that condition them to buy, and to understand that sales process, that consideration process, a little bit better.
Perfect place to end. Gee, thank you so very much for being on. So much information, such great perspective. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I'm delighted to be invited, as they say. Thank you very much for having me on.